I started out writing the 6 main plot graph points. When I did that, I wrote out a little summary of what I thought my story was going to be about. Almost as soon as I started writing it, I realized I was already changing things, so I kept writing and changing it as I went. When I got to about the middle of the story, I realized I didn't have enough room to write the whole ending, so I edited what I had brainstormed so that I wouldn't forget the new ending, and I kept writing. When I finally got to the end of the story, I looked back on it and saw that I had still gone over the limit by a huge amount. I'll mention this later in the presentation. When you're brainstorming, I think it's easier to do what I just said instead of writing it all down and then having to edit it all at once. Your ending and beginning are usually the most important parts, so you want them to make sense. So if they're hard to understand, then your reader will be confused for the rest of the story. If you really need to edit down your story, then I would suggest to take out only a little bit per paragraph instead of taking out an entire paragraph. Then you might go back and find out that what you got rid of was extremely important. Try to make editing fun, because if you don't love it and you just want to rush through it, your story is going to be full of holes. Let's start off with the most essential instruction. Make sure never to get rid of your most important parts. I know that sounds obvious, but you might be editing and accidentally get rid of a key element to your story. Then when you go back, you'll realize what you've done. Also, don't get rid of too much dialogue, because that's what keeps your story rolling. It makes the reader engage with the characters, and if you get rid of that, it'll be harder for the reader to connect with your characters. Here's something I learned while writing. If you start to look for spell checks in your story, while still making sure your story makes sense, you're going to lose focus. When that happens, you'll skip over mistakes in the story. When I first started, I put everything I had in my head onto the paper. I found that I had 4.5 pages, so it seemed I had to get rid of a whole page. Slowly I went through it and got rid of the sentences that didn't need to be in there and were just taking up space. Eventually I did, and I spell checked it and fixed up all the paragraphs I had just torn up. When I finished that, I found that I had 4 pages, which meant I still had to get it down to about 3.5 pages. Finally, I did. She knew that there was no way he would be able to survive out there. The captain said he would put it over the ship's PA and tell everyone to alert him or one of the crew if they saw him. But I don't think he's on the boat, she tried to explain. The lights above her flickered and the ship shuddered. That didn't sound good, said the captain fearfully. She hung up the phone and immediately let the tears fall from her eyes. Her husband was dead. The ship shuddered again. It sounded like they were sinking. The ship quickly started to fill with water. The crew blasted out the door and people tried their best to follow them. But they weren't prepared. They weren't ready for what hit them. So when they were supposed to move, some people just froze. So when the water hit them, they got whipped back and smashed against the wall. Lisa couldn't do anything because she had to go or she'd get squashed too. They stayed underwater, moving forward until the crew mentioned it was okay to come up. I have edited my entire story. I have used many different sources for checking my spelling, the top ones being Grammarly, Hemingway Editor, and my mom. Her actual job is proofing documents for grammar, spelling, wording of sentences, and much more. Hemingway tells me if any sentences are hard to read, and sometimes, if I agree, I'll fix them. One of the hardest parts of editing this story is that I have to go back into my story to make sure it was all in the past tense. I also check to make sure all of my paragraphs and sentences work well together. I need to make sure that they flow. Having someone else read your story is important because your opinion of your story is a bit biased. So when someone else reads it, they can point out all of the things that don't make sense. They can also provide their thoughts on it. When they tell you what they thought of it, you might realize that they got something completely different from the story than you did.